The spring morning of 1943 arrived cold and grey over Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort stood before the large window of his basement office, watching the early light struggle to break through the overcast sky. The view from Station Hypo, deep within the 14th Naval District headquarters, offered little comfort. Nearly 18 months had passed since that terrible December morning when the harbour burned, and the memory still haunted every corner of this place. The smell of salt water mixed with the ever-present odour of coffee and cigarette smoke that permeated the windowless rooms where he and his team worked around the clock. Behind him, the constant clatter of typewriters and the low murmur of intense conversations filled the air. Men hunched over desks covered with papers filled with seemingly random sequences of numbers and letters. Some wore headphones, listening intently to recordings of intercepted radio transmissions. Others worked with frequency charts and cipher tables spread before them like ancient manuscripts, holding secrets that could change the course of the war. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh, sterile glow that made everyone look exhausted, which most of them were. Rochefort turned from the window and surveyed his domain. These men, handpicked for their linguistic skills, mathematical brilliance, and dogged determination, represented America's best hope of gaining an advantage in the vast Pacific theater. They were fighting a war of invisible weapons, where success meant breaking into the enemy's most guarded communications, and failure meant ships sunk and lives lost. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on every person in this room. If you are finding this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical narratives that bring the past to life. Lieutenant Thomas Dyer approached Rochefort's desk with a handful of decoded intercepts. His face carried the same exhausted determination that everyone wore like a uniform down here. Dyer had been working double shifts for weeks, driven by the same obsession that consumed them all. They were so close to something big. Every instinct Rochefort had developed over years of intelligence work told him they were on the verge of a breakthrough. The intercepts Dyer placed on the desk were fragments of messages sent in the Japanese Navy's most secure code, designated JN-25 by American cryptanalysts. Breaking this code had become the singular focus of multiple intelligence stations across the Pacific. Each station contributed pieces to the puzzle, sharing their findings through secure channels. Melbourne, Washington, and Pearl Harbor formed a triangle of code-breaking effort, with Station Hypo at Pearl serving as the primary hub for tactical intelligence in the Pacific Fleet's area of operations. Rochefort picked up one of the intercepts and studied it carefully. The message referenced repeated use of a location designator that had been appearing with increasing frequency over the past several weeks. The Japanese used a system of geographic designators, two-letter codes, that represented specific locations throughout their area of operations. This particular designator had appeared in contexts suggesting major operational planning. Something significant was being prepared, and this location, whatever it actually represented, seemed central to Japanese intentions. The challenge facing Rochefort and his team was twofold. First, they had to break enough of the JN-25 code to understand the substance of enemy communications. This was a monumental task in itself. The Japanese Navy changed their codebooks regularly, and even partial breaks required thousands of hours of painstaking analytical work. Second, even when they could read portions of messages, the geographic designators remained mysteries unless they could be correlated with known locations through careful analysis of multiple intercepts and operational patterns. Captain Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet's intelligence officer, arrived at Station Hypo shortly after dawn. His relationship with Rochefort had evolved into one of mutual respect and trust, essential qualities in the high-stakes world of naval intelligence. Layton understood that the work being done in this basement could tip the balance of the entire Pacific campaign. Admiral Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, relied heavily on Layton's assessments, which in turn depended on the intelligence produced by Rochefort's team. Rochefort briefed Layton on the latest developments. They spread dozens of intercepts across a large table, arranging them chronologically and by originating station. A pattern emerged from the chaos of partial decrypts and fragmentary information. Multiple Japanese commands were clearly coordinating something substantial. References to aircraft carriers, battleships and troop movements suggested an operation of significant scale, and at the center of it all appeared that mysterious location designator. The two men discussed various possibilities. The Japanese had been increasingly active in the South Pacific, and there were concerns about potential threats to the supply lines connecting the United States to Australia. Hawaii itself could never be ruled out as a target, given the proximity and strategic importance. The Aleutian Islands in Alaska represented another possibility, offering the Japanese a potential foothold in North American territory. Each scenario carried different implications for how the Pacific Fleet would need to position and prepare itself. As they talked, a young ensign named Robert Hudson approached with a fresh intercept that had just been processed. Hudson was one of the newer members of the team, recruited directly from university, where he had been studying linguistics and mathematics. His youth and relative inexperience were offset by a brilliant analytical mind and tireless work ethic. He had been tasked with tracking every appearance of the mysterious location designator and cross-referencing it with known Japanese operational patterns. What Hudson had discovered sent a surge of excitement through the room. In one of the latest intercepts, the location designator appeared in a message that also referenced water supplies and distillation equipment. This seemingly mundane detail was actually extraordinarily significant. It suggested that the location in question had limited fresh water resources, which dramatically narrowed the possibilities. Most major Japanese bases and operational areas had adequate water supplies. The need to specifically mention water issues pointed toward an isolated island location. Rochefort felt the pieces beginning to align in his mind. He walked over to the large map of the Pacific that dominated one wall of the operations room. His eyes scanned the vast blue expanse dotted with countless islands. Which ones would require Japanese forces to bring their own water supplies? The list was long, but could be narrowed by considering strategic value and operational patterns. His finger traced possible routes and locations, his mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, another key member of the intelligence team, joined the discussion. Holmes brought a different perspective. Having served extensively in the Pacific before the war, he knew the geography intimately and understood Japanese strategic thinking from years of study. Together, he and Rochefort began systematically eliminating possibilities based on operational logic and the available intelligence. The conversation continued for hours as more intercepts arrived and were processed. Each new piece of information added detail to the emerging picture. References to specific units and commanders appeared in the messages. Timelines began to solidify. The operation, whatever it was, seemed to be planned for early June, just a few weeks away. The urgency of determining the target location intensified with each passing hour. As evening approached, Rochefort made a decision. They needed to test their hypothesis about the water issue. If they could somehow trick the Japanese into revealing the meaning of that location designator, it would confirm their analysis and provide Admiral Nimitz with the actionable intelligence he needed to position the fleet. But how could they accomplish this without alerting the Japanese that their codes were being read? The solution, when it came to Rochefort, was elegant in its simplicity. The location they suspected was connected to the mysterious designator had a secure underwater cable linking it to Hawaii. This cable could be used to send a message that the Japanese could not intercept. If they arranged for that location to send an uncoded radio message reporting a problem with their water distillation plant, and if the Japanese intercepted that message, they might then reference it in their own coded traffic. If that reference included the location designator, it would confirm the connection. The plan required coordination with multiple commands and carried risks. If executed clumsily, it might alert the Japanese that their communications were compromised. But Rochefort felt confident it could be done subtly enough to avoid suspicion. He presented the plan to Leighton, who recognized both its ingenuity and its potential value. Leighton agreed to take it to Admiral Nimitz for approval. Within days, the plan was implemented. A radio message from the suspected location reported difficulties with water distillation equipment. The message was sent in the clear, easily intercepted by anyone listening. Then Rochefort and his team waited, monitoring Japanese communications with intense focus. The tension in Station Hypo was palpable as hours passed with no result. Had the Japanese noticed the message? Would they reference it in their communications, or had the entire effort been wasted? Then, late on the second day after the false message was sent, an intercept arrived that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing. A Japanese message referenced the water problems at the location, designated by the mysterious two-letter code. It was the confirmation they needed. The code designated Midway Island, a small atoll roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. The Japanese were planning a major operation against Midway, and they were doing so with the assumption that their communications remained secure. The implications were staggering. Midway represented a critical outpost for American defenses. Its loss would expose Hawaii to greater threat and extend Japanese control deeper into the Central Pacific. But forewarned was forearmed. With this intelligence, Admiral Nimitz could position the Pacific Fleet to meet the Japanese attack with a defensive ambush. The hunters would become the hunted. Rochefort worked with renewed intensity to extract every possible detail from the Japanese communications. His team mapped out the enemy order of battle, identifying which carriers, battleships, and support vessels would participate in the operation. They tracked the planned movements and timing, building a comprehensive picture of Japanese intentions. Each new intercept added another detail to the intelligence mosaic. The information revealed that the Japanese planned to use 4 aircraft carriers as the striking force, supported by battleships and cruisers. They intended to bombard Midway with carrier aircraft while simultaneously launching an invasion force to capture the island. The operation was clearly conceived as a decisive blow that would either draw out the American fleet for destruction or, failing that, establish Japanese control over a strategic position that would threaten Hawaii itself. But the intercepts revealed something else as well, something that would prove even more significant than the Midway operation. Among the decoded messages were references to an inspection tour by a high-ranking Japanese naval officer. The messages used a specific designator for this individual, one that Rochefort's team had previously associated with only the most senior commanders. The tour would take the officer through various Japanese-held positions in the South Pacific, with specific dates and locations mentioned in the planning messages. Lieutenant Dyer was the first to fully grasp the implications. He brought the relevant intercepts to Rochefort's attention late one night, when most of the team had finally gone to catch a few hours of sleep. The two men studied the messages carefully, cross-referencing them with previous intelligence about Japanese command structure. The conclusion was inescapable. The officer planning this inspection tour was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet and architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Rochefort felt his pulse quicken as he absorbed this information. Yamamoto was not merely a senior commander, he was the strategic mastermind behind Japan's naval operations. His planning had brought Japan to the height of its power in the Pacific. His leadership had inflicted terrible losses on American forces, and now, the intercepts revealed, he would be traveling to forward positions in a manner that might make him vulnerable to interception. The ethical and strategic calculations were complex. Targeting a specific individual, even an enemy commander, represented a different kind of warfare. But the potential impact of removing Yamamoto from the Japanese command structure was enormous. He was irreplaceable in terms of strategic vision and operational expertise. His loss would be a blow to Japanese morale and a significant degradation of their command capabilities. Yet the attempt to intercept him would also risk revealing to the Japanese that their codes had been broken, potentially closing off this invaluable source of intelligence. Rochefort prepared a detailed intelligence summary of Yamamoto's planned movements. The messages indicated he would be flying in a transport aircraft from Rabaul to Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. The route, timing, and even the type of aircraft were specified in the intercepts. It was the kind of specific, actionable intelligence that seldom became available, and it presented an opportunity that might never come again. Captain Layton brought the intelligence to Admiral Nimitz. The decision about how to act on this information would ultimately come from the highest levels of command. Nimitz understood immediately the significance and the risks. He consulted with his senior staff, weighing the potential benefits against the danger of compromising the code-breaking operation that had become so vital to American success in the Pacific. Meanwhile, preparations for the Battle of Midway moved forward based on the intelligence provided by Station Hypo. Admiral Nimitz positioned 3 aircraft carriers northeast of Midway, keeping them beyond the range of Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. The carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, would lie in wait for the Japanese striking force, turning the planned ambush on its head. Every detail of the American defensive plan was informed by the intelligence flowing from Rochefort's team. The Battle of Midway unfolded in early June, exactly as the intelligence had predicted. The Japanese approached with confidence, unaware that American forces awaited them. The resulting engagement proved devastating to Japanese naval aviation. 4 carriers were sunk, and with them went hundreds of experienced pilots and aircraft that Japan could not easily replace. The battle marked a turning point in the Pacific War, shifting the strategic initiative to American forces, and it validated the extraordinary value of the code-breaking work being done at Station Hypo and other intelligence stations. After Midway, the question of what to do about Yamamoto's inspection tour took on even greater urgency. The value of the code-breaking intelligence had been proven beyond any doubt, but that very success made the decision about potentially compromising it more difficult. Senior commanders debated the issue with strong opinions on both sides. Some argued that removing Yamamoto was worth the risk. Others contended that the ongoing intelligence from reading Japanese codes was too valuable to jeopardize. The decision was ultimately made to proceed with an operation to intercept Yamamoto during his flight to Bougainville. The risks were deemed acceptable given the potential impact of eliminating such a key figure from the Japanese command structure. Careful planning went into ensuring that the operation could be presented as the result of routine reconnaissance rather than specific intelligence, hopefully preserving the secret of the code-breaking efforts. Army Air Force P-38, Lightning fighters based at Guadalcanal, were tasked with the mission. The intercepts had provided the exact date, time, and route of Yamamoto's flight. 18 P-38s, flying at low altitude to avoid detection, positioned themselves to intercept the 2 transport aircraft carrying Yamamoto and his staff. The timing had to be perfect, and the pilots had to navigate several hundred miles over open ocean to reach the interception point at precisely the right moment. On April 18, 1943, the American fighters made their interception. The two Japanese transport aircraft, escorted by 6 fighters, were exactly where and when the intelligence had predicted. The engagement was brief and decisive. Both transport aircraft were shot down. Yamamoto died in the crash of his plane in the jungle of Bougainville, the architect of Pearl Harbor and Japan's most capable naval strategist, was gone. Back at Station Haipo, Rochefort and his team monitored Japanese communications for any indication that their codes had been compromised. The initial Japanese messages showed shock and grief at Yamamoto's death, but no immediate suspicion about how the Americans had known his location. The Japanese seemed to accept that the interception could have resulted from routine patrol activity. Over the following weeks and months, they continued to use the JN-25 code system, allowing American codebreakers to maintain their window into Japanese communications. The impact of Yamamoto's death on Japanese naval operations became apparent over time. His replacements lacked his strategic vision and operational audacity. Decision-making at the highest levels of the Japanese Navy became more cautious and less coordinated. While the war in the Pacific continued for more than 2 years after Yamamoto's death, Japan never regained the strategic initiative it had held in the war's early months. The combination of the Midway defeat and the loss of Yamamoto marked the beginning of a long decline for Japanese naval power. For Rochefort and his team at Station Haipo, the success of both the Midway operation and the Yamamoto interception validated the extraordinary effort they had invested in breaking Japanese codes. The work continued without pause, as new codebooks and systems had to be attacked constantly. The team expanded as more linguists, mathematicians, and analysts were recruited. The basement headquarters grew more crowded, and the pace more intense as the Pacific campaign accelerated. Lieutenant Dyer continued his meticulous work tracking Japanese communications patterns. His ability to spot subtle changes in message routing and command relationships provided early warning of Japanese intentions on numerous occasions. Ensign Hudson developed into one of the team's most skilled analysts, his youth and fresh perspective often leading to innovative approaches to difficult decryption problems. Lieutenant Commander Holmes maintained his role as the strategic interpreter, translating the raw intelligence into operationally relevant assessments for the fleet commanders. Captain Layton remained the critical link between the codebreakers and Admiral Nimitz, ensuring that the intelligence reached the right people at the right time. His relationship with Rochefort deepened into a partnership that exemplified the best aspects of intelligence operations, technical expertise combined with operational understanding, all filtered through professional judgment and personal trust. Together, they helped shape American strategy in the Pacific for the remainder of the war. The spring of 1943 gave way to summer, and then to fall and winter. Each season brought new operations, new battles, and new challenges for the codebreakers. They tracked Japanese fleet movements during the Guadalcanal campaign, provided intelligence for the island-hopping strategy that began carrying American forces across the Pacific, and monitored the gradual weakening of Japanese naval capabilities as losses mounted and resources dwindled. Through it all, the men of Station Haipo maintained their vigil in that windowless basement, working shifts that blurred together into an endless cycle of intercepts, decryptions, and analysis. They rarely saw combat themselves, but they fought the war as surely as any sailor or marine. Their weapons were mathematical formulas and linguistic insight. Their battlefield, a realm of invisible radio waves and encoded messages. The casualties they prevented and the victories they enabled were their measure of success. Rochefort himself remained the driving force behind the operation, pushing his team to extract every possible insight from the Japanese communications. His intensity sometimes bordered on obsession, but no one questioned his dedication or his skill. He understood that in the war of intelligence, every advantage mattered. Every decoded message potentially saved lives. Every insight into Japanese intentions gave American commanders more time to prepare, more options to consider, and better chances of success. The relationship between the codebreakers and the commanders they served was not always smooth. There were moments of frustration when intelligence was questioned or when operational commanders made decisions that seemed to ignore the available information. But over time, as success followed success, the value of the intelligence operation became undeniable. Commanders learned to trust the information coming from Station Hypo, and the trust translated into more aggressive and effective operations. The days following Yamamoto's death brought a mixture of triumph and anxiety to Station Hypo. While the successful interception had removed Japan's most capable naval strategist, Rochefort and his team remained vigilant for any sign that the Japanese had discovered their codes were compromised. Every intercepted message was scrutinized, not just for its intelligence value, but for any indication of suspicion or changes in Japanese communications security procedures. Lieutenant Dyer spent long hours analyzing the patterns of Japanese radio traffic in the weeks after the operation. He looked for anomalies that might suggest the enemy had begun implementing new security measures. The frequency of messages, the routing patterns, the use of different code systems, all of these factors could provide clues about Japanese awareness of the breach. What he found was both reassuring and somewhat surprising. The Japanese seemed genuinely convinced that Yamamoto's death had resulted from an unfortunate encounter with American patrol aircraft rather than a targeted assassination based on intercepted communications. The intercepts revealed deep mourning within the Japanese Navy. Messages between commands expressed shock and grief at the loss of their commander. Some communications discussed the circumstances of his death, speculating about how the American fighters had happened to be in exactly the right place at the right time. A few messages suggested increased caution in future movements of senior officers, but there was no indication of a comprehensive security review or suspicion that codes had been broken. Ensign Hudson was assigned to track all references to Yamamoto in the decoded traffic. What emerged was a picture of a leader who had been deeply respected, even revered, by those who served under him. The messages painted a portrait of a man who had been more than just a brilliant strategist. He had been a mentor to many younger officers, a voice of caution against some of the more extreme elements in the Japanese military, and a leader who commanded loyalty through competence and character rather than through fear or rigid discipline. Reading these messages gave Hudson a strange feeling. The enemy suddenly seemed more human, more complex than the simplistic propaganda portrayals suggested. These were men mourning a leader they had admired, grappling with the loss of someone who had shaped their professional lives and guided their nation's naval forces through years of conflict. It was a reminder that on the other side of these radio transmissions were real people with emotions, relationships, and experiences not so different from those of the Americans reading their messages. Rochefort noticed Hudson's thoughtful mood one evening as they reviewed the day's intelligence summaries. The older officer understood what the younger man was experiencing. Breaking codes and reading enemy communications created an intimate knowledge of the adversary that few others in the military possessed. It complicated the simple narratives of war, adding layers of complexity to what might otherwise be seen as a straightforward conflict between good and evil. They talked for a while about the nature of their work and its moral dimensions. Rochefort shared his own struggles with these questions, acknowledging that the intelligence they gathered and the operations it enabled resulted in deaths, sometimes on a massive scale. The Midway operation, informed by their code breaking, had killed thousands of Japanese sailors and aviators. The Yamamoto mission had specifically targeted an individual for death. These were not abstract achievements, but concrete acts with profound human consequences. Yet Rochefort also articulated the counter-argument that sustained him and most of his team. Every Japanese ship sunk because of their intelligence was a ship that would not attack American forces. Every Japanese operation disrupted by foreknowledge saved American lives. The intelligence war they were fighting was ultimately about protection, about using information to minimize casualties and shorten the conflict. In that context, their work was not just justified, but essential. The conversation reflected a maturity of thought that characterized many of the men at Station Hypo. They were not naive about what they were doing or its consequences. They understood that intelligence work existed in morally complex territory where clear distinctions between right and wrong sometimes blurred, but they also understood that in the context of a brutal war against an aggressor nation, their work served a vital purpose in defending their country and its allies. As summer turned to fall in 1943, the intelligence operation continued to evolve and expand. New personnel arrived at Station Hypo, bringing fresh perspectives and additional capacity. The basement headquarters was becoming increasingly crowded, with desks pushed close together and filing cabinets lining every available wall. The original team had grown from a handful of dedicated specialists to a substantial organization with dozens of analysts, translators, and support staff. Among the new arrivals was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, one of the first women to be assigned to the code-breaking operation. Her presence initially caused some discomfort among the male-dominated team, but her skills quickly won respect. Mitchell had studied mathematics at Berkeley and possessed an intuitive grasp of statistical analysis that proved invaluable in attacking certain aspects of the Japanese codes. She brought a different analytical approach that complemented the existing team's methods. Mitchell's assignment reflected broader changes in how the military was utilizing available talent. The demands of wartime had created labor shortages that forced a reconsideration of traditional gender roles. Women were increasingly being brought into areas that had previously been exclusively male domains, and intelligence work was no exception. The Navy had recognized that breaking codes required intellectual capability rather than physical strength, making it an area where women could contribute on equal terms with men. The integration was not without challenges. Some of the older officers struggled with the idea of working alongside women in such sensitive roles. There were concerns about propriety, about whether women could handle the pressure and the long hours, about whether their presence would disrupt the team's cohesion. But Mitchell and the other women who followed her quickly proved those concerns unfounded. They worked the same shifts, tackled the same problems, and demonstrated the same commitment as their male colleagues. Rochefort supported the integration fully, judging people on their capabilities rather than their gender. He recognized that the code-breaking mission was too important to arbitrarily exclude half the population from contributing. Mitchell's analytical insights proved this point repeatedly as she identified patterns in Japanese communications that others had missed. Her work on frequency analysis helped crack a particularly stubborn variation of the JN25 code system that had been resisting solution for weeks. The expanded team tackled an increasingly complex intelligence picture. As the war progressed, Japanese communications became more varied and sophisticated. New code systems appeared, requiring fresh analytical approaches. The geographic scope of operations expanded, with Japanese forces spread across thousands of miles from the Central Pacific to Southeast Asia. Tracking all of this required more personnel, more equipment, and more sophisticated organizational systems. Lieutenant Commander Holmes took on the role of chief analyst, coordinating the work of different sections within Station Hypo. He developed a system for prioritizing intelligence based on operational relevance and time sensitivity. Not every intercepted message was equally important, and with limited resources, the team had to focus on the information that would provide the most value to fleet commanders. This required judgment and experience, qualities that Holmes possessed in abundance. The analytical process itself became more systematized as the operation matured. Raw intercepts arrived from listening stations scattered across the Pacific. These were first processed by traffic analysts who determined their origin, destination, and priority based on various technical factors. Then, they went to the cryptanalysts who worked on breaking the actual codes. Successfully decoded messages moved to translators who rendered the Japanese text into English. Finally, the translated messages reached the intelligence analysts who interpreted their meaning and significance. Each stage required specialized skills and deep expertise. The traffic analysts needed to understand radio propagation, Japanese communications procedures, and the technical aspects of signal interception. The cryptanalysts required mathematical sophistication and the ability to see patterns in seemingly random data. The translators had to master not just the Japanese language, but the specific military terminology and stylistic conventions used in naval communications. The intelligence analysts needed to understand Japanese military organization, strategy, and operational patterns well enough to interpret what the decoded messages actually meant. Dyer excelled at this final stage of analysis. His mind worked in ways that allowed him to see connections between disparate pieces of information. He could take a dozen different messages, each containing only fragments of information, and synthesize them into a coherent picture of Japanese intentions. This ability made him invaluable to the operation and led to his eventual command of Station Hypo after Rochefort's departure. One of Dyer's most significant analytical achievements came in late 1943 when he identified preparations for a major Japanese naval operation in the central Solomon Islands. The intelligence picture was fragmentary and confused, with conflicting indicators about Japanese intentions. Some messages suggested a major fleet movement, while others seemed to indicate routine repositioning of forces. The timing was unclear, and the specific objectives remained ambiguous. Dyer spent days immersed in the intercepts, building a timeline of Japanese communications and movements. He cross-referenced unit designations, command relationships, and geographic references. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The Japanese were planning a large-scale attempt to reinforce their garrison at Bougainville, using a substantial naval force to escort troop transports through waters increasingly dominated by American air and naval power. The operation was scheduled for early November and represented a significant commitment of resources by the Japanese. This intelligence allowed Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific forces, to position American naval and air assets to intercept the Japanese force. The resulting Battle of Empress Augusta Bay proved a tactical victory for American forces, with the Japanese losing several cruisers and failing to land their reinforcements. The battle demonstrated once again the enormous value of the intelligence flowing from Station Hypo. But success brought its own pressures. Each victory based on intelligence raised the stakes for the code-breaking operation. The more the intelligence proved its value, the more commanders came to depend on it. This created expectations that were sometimes difficult to meet. Not every Japanese operation could be predicted with equal clarity. Some messages remained partially or completely unreadable. The fog of war affected intelligence operations just as it affected combat operations, and managing expectations became an important part of Layton's role as the liaison between the codebreakers and the fleet commanders. Admiral Nimitz understood these limitations better than most. His background in naval intelligence gave him an appreciation for both the capabilities and constraints of signals intelligence. He pushed his intelligence officers to provide the best possible information, but recognized that perfection was impossible. This balanced approach helped maintain trust even when the intelligence was incomplete or uncertain. Nimitz knew how to factor intelligence uncertainties into his operational planning, using the information to reduce risk rather than expecting it to eliminate risk entirely. The winter of 1943 brought new challenges as Japanese communications security improved. The enemy was not oblivious to the possibility of code compromise, and they periodically implemented changes to their systems. A major codebook change in December required Station Hypo to essentially start over in breaking certain categories of traffic. Weeks of patient analytical work had to be invested before readable intelligence began flowing again. These periods of partial or complete blackout were tremendously frustrating for everyone involved. Commanders who had grown accustomed to detailed intelligence about enemy intentions suddenly found themselves operating with much less information. The codebreakers felt the pressure intensely, knowing that fleet operations were being conducted with less situational awareness than had become normal. The entire team worked extended hours trying to rebuild their ability to read Japanese communications. Mitchell distinguished herself during this period by developing a new approach to recovering code values from partially readable messages. Her statistical methods allowed the team to make educated guesses about unknown code groups based on context and usage patterns. While not providing the certainty of full decryption, this technique filled some of the intelligence gaps and helped maintain a basic understanding of Japanese activities even when complete messages remained unreadable. The breakthrough on the new codebook came in late January 1944, the result of a fortuitous capture of code materials from a damaged Japanese submarine. The submarine had been forced to surface after depth charge attacks and was abandoned by its crew before American forces could board it. Navy divers recovered documents from the vessel, including portions of current codebooks. These materials, combined with the analytical work already done at Station Hypo, allowed the codebreakers to rapidly restore their ability to read large portions of Japanese naval traffic. This incident highlighted the importance of coordinating different intelligence collection methods: signals intelligence, document exploitation, prisoner interrogation, and photographic reconnaissance all contributed to building a comprehensive understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions. Station Hypo existed as part of a larger intelligence ecosystem, and its success depended partly on effective integration with these other sources and methods. Hudson took on increasing responsibility for managing these different intelligence streams. His role evolved from pure cryptanalysis to intelligence fusion, bringing together information from multiple sources to create integrated assessments. This required different skills than code breaking, including the ability to evaluate source reliability, reconcile conflicting information, and present complex analyses in clear, actionable terms. The spring of 1944 brought accelerating operational tempo as American forces prepared for major offensives across the Pacific. The Marianas Campaign was taking shape, with plans to capture Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands would provide bases for B-29 bombers capable of reaching the Japanese home islands, making them objectives of tremendous strategic importance. Intelligence about Japanese defensive preparations and potential countermoves became critical to planning these operations. Station Hypo worked around the clock, providing intelligence support for the Marianas operation. Intercepts revealed Japanese awareness of American intentions and their determination to defend these islands with all available forces. Messages discussed reinforcement of garrisons, positioning of aircraft, and preparation of defensive positions. More ominously, The intercepts indicated that the Japanese Navy was preparing to use its remaining carrier strength in a decisive battle to prevent the loss of the Marianas. This intelligence gave Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, crucial advance warning of Japanese intentions. He positioned his carriers to intercept the Japanese force while supporting the Marianas' landings. The resulting Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 proved catastrophic for Japanese naval aviation. American fighters, aided by new proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells and radar-directed fire control, decimated attacking Japanese aircraft. The engagement cost Japan approximately 600 aircraft and their irreplaceable pilots, losses from which Japanese naval aviation would never recover. The victory owed much to the intelligence provided by Station Haipo and other code-breaking stations. Knowledge of Japanese plans allowed American commanders to position their forces optimally and prepare for the attack. The codebreakers had once again proved their worth in the most dramatic fashion possible, contributing to a victory that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Pacific. But the cost of success was measured in more than enemy casualties. The men and women of Station Haipo were pushing themselves to the limits of human endurance. The pressure of knowing that lives depended on their work, combined with the endless hours and the monotonous intensity of the analytical tasks, took a toll. Some team members developed stress-related health problems. Others struggled with exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. The emotional weight of the work affected everyone differently, but few escaped its impact entirely. Rochefort himself showed signs of the accumulated strain. His legendary intensity had always driven the operation, but by mid-1944, colleagues noticed changes in his demeanor. He became more irritable, less patient with mistakes or delays. The long hours he had maintained since before Pearl Harbor were catching up with him, yet he refused to slow down or delegate more responsibility, convinced that his personal oversight remained essential to the mission's success. The bureaucratic conflicts that would eventually lead to Rochefort's departure from Station Haipo were already brewing. Tensions with Washington-based intelligence organizations had existed for years, rooted in personality conflicts, differing analytical approaches, and competition for resources and recognition. These tensions intensified as the value of code-breaking intelligence became more widely acknowledged. Success bred competition for credit, and Rochefort's abrasive personality sometimes made him enemies in places where he needed allies. Despite these gathering storms, the intelligence operation continued to produce results throughout the summer and fall of 1944. The invasion of the Philippines, beginning with landings at Leyte in October, represented the culmination of the island-hopping strategy that had been systematically rolling back Japanese conquests. Intelligence from Station Haipo and other sources provided detailed information about Japanese defensive positions, troop strengths, and intentions. As 1944 arrived, the pace of operations in the Pacific intensified. American forces pushed deeper into Japanese-held territory, and the codebreakers at Station Haipo found themselves tracking an increasingly desperate enemy. Japanese communications revealed supply shortages, fuel limitations, and declining morale. The strategic situation was turning decisively against Japan, and the intelligence picture reflected that reality with stark clarity. But the Japanese Navy still posed a dangerous threat. Their carriers, though reduced in number, remained potent weapons. Their submarines continued to stalk American shipping lanes, and their determination to defend their remaining positions made every advance a costly endeavor. The intelligence provided by Rochefort's team helped minimize those costs by giving American commanders the information they needed to choose their battles wisely and attack from positions of strength. The spring of 1944 brought new challenges and new victories. Intelligence about Japanese dispositions informed the planning for the Marianas Campaign. Codebreakers tracked the movements of Japanese carriers as they attempted to counter American advances. The resulting Battle of the Philippine Sea proved catastrophic for Japanese naval aviation, with hundreds of aircraft and their irreplaceable pilots lost in what American pilots grimly dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Through the summer and fall, American forces continued their advance across the Pacific. The Philippines beckoned, offering the opportunity to cut Japanese supply lines to Southeast Asia and establish bases for the final assault on the Japanese home islands. Intelligence from Station Haipo and other code-breaking stations provided crucial information about Japanese defensive plans and the disposition of remaining naval forces. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 represented the final major fleet engagement of the Pacific War. Once again, intelligence about Japanese intentions and movements gave American commanders a significant advantage. The Japanese Navy suffered crippling losses from which it would never recover. After Leyte Gulf, Japan's once mighty fleet existed more as a memory than a threat, its surviving ships largely trapped in port by fuel shortages and the overwhelming American naval presence. For Rochefort, the later stages of the war brought both satisfaction and frustration. The satisfaction came from seeing the intelligence operation he had built contribute so significantly to American success. The frustration stemmed from bureaucratic conflicts that eventually led to his removal from command of Station Haipo and reassignment to other duties. The politics of military intelligence could be as complex and unforgiving as any battlefield, and Rochefort found himself on the wrong side of those politics despite his successes. But the work continued without him, carried on by the team he had trained and the systems he had established. Lieutenant Dyer took over command of Station Haipo and maintained the high standards Rochefort had set. The flow of intelligence continued unabated, supporting American operations through the final year of the war. The invasion of Okinawa, the strategic bombing campaign against the Japanese home islands, and ultimately the decision to use atomic weapons were all informed by intelligence that had its roots in the code-breaking efforts that began in that crowded basement at Pearl Harbor. When the war finally ended in August 1945, the contribution of the codebreakers began to emerge from the shadows of wartime secrecy. Their work had remained classified throughout the conflict, protected by the tightest security. The Japanese never fully realized the extent to which their codes had been broken, though they made changes to their systems that required constant analytical effort to overcome. The men who had spent years in Station Haipo and similar installations returned to civilian life carrying secrets they could not share. Their families and friends knew they had done something important, but could never know the details. The stories of their long hours, their analytical breakthroughs, and their crucial contributions to victory remained locked behind classification barriers for decades. Thomas Dyer returned to his pre-war career in academia, bringing with him an understanding of cryptography and intelligence that would inform his teaching, but which he could never fully discuss with his students. Robert Hudson went on to a career in the State Department, his linguistic skills and analytical abilities finding new application in the diplomatic realm. Jasper Holmes returned to the academic world as well, eventually writing histories of the Pacific War that carefully avoided revealing the intelligence secrets he had helped create. Edwin Layton remained in naval service after the war, eventually retiring as a rear admiral. His relationship with Admiral Nimitz had been forged in the crucible of war, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect that endured for the rest of their lives. He carried with him the knowledge that the intelligence operation had been central to American success in the Pacific, saving countless lives and shortening the war by months, if not years. Joseph Rochefort's story took a different turn. Despite his crucial contributions to the war effort, the bureaucratic conflicts that had led to his relief from Station Hypo left him somewhat embittered. He served out the remainder of the war in less prominent positions and retired from the Navy shortly after the war's end. It would take decades before his role received the recognition it deserved, but eventually the historical record would acknowledge him as one of the key figures in American victory in the Pacific. The impact of the code-breaking operation extended far beyond the immediate tactical and operational intelligence it provided. The success of Station Hypo and similar organizations demonstrated the critical importance of signals intelligence in modern warfare. After the war, this recognition led to the establishment of permanent intelligence agencies and the integration of signals intelligence into military planning at all levels. The National Security Agency traces its lineage directly back to the wartime code-breaking efforts. The story of how American cryptanalysts broke Japanese naval codes and used that intelligence to achieve decisive victories remains one of the most remarkable chapters of World War II. It was a victory of intellect over force, of patient analytical work over brute military power. The men who accomplished this feat were heroes in the truest sense, though their heroism took a form very different from the conventional image of military valor. They fought their war in basement rooms filled with papers and cipher machines. They won their battles with mathematical formulas and linguistic insight. They saved lives by the thousands through the intelligence they provided. Though they never fired a shot in anger, their enemy never saw them, never knew their names, and never fully understood how thoroughly their most secret communications had been compromised. The breaking of Japanese naval codes stands as a testament to what can be accomplished through dedication, intelligence, and teamwork. It demonstrates the value of investing in intelligence capabilities and the importance of trusting and acting upon the intelligence those capabilities produce. The lessons learned in that crowded basement at Pearl Harbor continue to resonate today, informing how modern military organizations approach the challenge of understanding and countering their adversaries. As the decades passed after the war, more details of the code-breaking operation became public. Classified documents were declassified, participants began to speak more openly about their experiences, and historians pieced together a comprehensive picture of what had been accomplished. The full story proved even more impressive than anyone had imagined during the war itself. The intelligence operation had not been without flaws. There were missed opportunities and analytical failures. Not every intercept was correctly understood, and not every piece of intelligence led to operational success, but the overall record was extraordinary. From the breaking of JN-25 to the intelligence that enabled the Midway victory, from tracking Japanese fleet movements to providing the information that led to Yamamoto's death, the codebreakers had achieved results that exceeded the most optimistic pre-war expectations. The human dimension of the story remained its most compelling aspect. These were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances, asked to accomplish tasks that seemed impossible and given tools that were barely adequate. They succeeded through a combination of brilliance, determination, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. They worked without recognition, without public acknowledgement, and often without even the satisfaction of knowing whether their efforts had made a difference. They endured the stress of knowing that mistakes could cost lives, that failures of analysis could lead to military disasters. They lived with the burden of secrets that could not be shared, and the isolation that came from working in a realm where even the nature of their work had to remain hidden. And they persevered, day after day, shift after shift, through exhaustion and frustration and the occasional despair that comes from confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges. The story of breaking Japanese naval codes and tracking Admiral Yamamoto to his death represents more than a tale of cryptographic success. It speaks to larger themes about the nature of modern warfare, the importance of intelligence in strategic competition, and the critical role that individual skill and dedication play, even in conflicts involving millions of people and vast resources. It demonstrates that wars are won not only on battlefields, but in the quiet spaces where information is gathered, analyzed, and transformed into actionable intelligence. The men of Station Hypo understood this truth even when the rest of the world did not. They knew that their work mattered, that every decoded message potentially saved lives and brought victory closer. That knowledge sustained them through the long hours and the endless pressure. It gave meaning to their sacrifice and purpose to their effort, and in the end, it proved sufficient to drive them to achievements that would echo through history, even if their names remained unknown to most of the people whose lives they had saved. The impact of their work continued to be felt long after the last shots of World War II fell silent. The techniques they developed, the organizational structures they created, and the lessons they learned all contributed to the development of modern intelligence agencies and capabilities. The codebreakers had not only helped win the war, they had helped create the foundations for American intelligence operations in the decades that followed. As the sun set over Pearl Harbor on countless evenings after the war, the basement that had housed Station Hypo stood quiet. The constant clatter of typewriters had ceased. The urgent conversations and tense analysis sessions were memories. But the legacy of what had been accomplished there lived on. It lived in the veterans who returned home, in the intelligence professionals who built on their work, and in the historical record that slowly emerged to give them the recognition they deserved. The story reminds us that victory in war comes in many forms. Sometimes it arrives in a decisive battle, where fleets clash and the outcome is written in fire and steel. But sometimes victory comes from a decoded message, from an analyst's insight, from the patient work of building up a comprehensive picture from thousands of fragments of information. Both kinds of victory are real, and both are essential. The men who broke Japanese naval codes and tracked Admiral Yamamoto wrote their chapter in the history of World War II with code tables and cipher machines, with mathematical formulas and linguistic analysis, with dedication and determination and an unwavering commitment to excellence. They fought their war in the shadows, achieving victories that remained secret for decades. But their contribution to the ultimate triumph was as real and as vital as any won on the battlefield. And their story deserves to be remembered and honored as one of the great achievements of the war.